The order came down the dark hall at a run, and the man who gave it was already shaking. "Abandon the post," he said. "Both of you. Now, the whole grid's gone, it isn't safe to stand here." I felt my own boots want to obey him because he wore the sash of a deputy warden and his voice cracked the way fear cracks a voice, and fear is contagious in the dark. But Corwin Vane did not move. He stood at the inner door of the Arden Hall the way he had stood at it for 9 years, rifle at the slope, chin level, eyes forward into a blackness that had swallowed the whole city, and he said nothing at all. I have thought about that silence every night since. It is the reason I am still proud to wear this tunic. My name is Aldous Riani. I was the second man on the night relief that evening, posted with Vane at the hall's east door, which is the door that matters, though you would not know it to look at it. People think the grand south gate is the heart of the building. It is not. The south gate is for cameras and crowds and the changing of the watch that the visitors film on their phones. The east door is plain oak banded in old iron, and behind it runs the spine of the Arden Hall, the muniment stair, the vaults, the rooms where the House of Aldermark keeps the things a kingdom cannot afford to lose. A man who holds the east door holds the artery. Vane knew that. I knew it because he had taught it to me in his way, which was mostly by standing where he stood and letting me work out why. The lights had gone an hour into our watch. Not a flicker, not a dimming, gone all at once the way a held breath ends. The hall went black to the corners. Outside, through the door's small grated panel, I watched the whole city drop into the same dark. The river bridges, the offices on the far bank, the long necklace of street lamps that usually held the night back. All of it gone. For one heartbeat the silence was total. Then the alarm started, somewhere deep in the building, and stopped, because the alarms ran on the same grid that had died. And then I heard the running feet. Deputy Warden Pell arrived out of breath with a small torch jerking in his hand, throwing our shadows huge and crooked up the paneled walls. He was not a soldier. He was an administrator of the hall's daytime business, schedules, deliveries, the comfort of visitors, and he was good at it, I think, in the daylight. But the dark had got into him. The torchlight shook so badly I could not hold my eyes on his face. "You don't understand," he said. "The fire doors lock on power. The cameras are blind. If something's happening, you two are standing in the worst place in the building. I'm ordering you to fall back to the south muster point. That's an order, guardsman." He said it to Vane. Everyone always said the important things to Vane, even strangers, even men who outranked him on paper. There was something in the set of him that made you address him as if he were the one who would decide. And Vane, who had not turned his head, said the only thing he said in that whole first stretch of the dark. He said quietly, "I can't do that, sir." Pell stared at him. I think he had never in his life had an order returned to him unopened. "You can't," he repeated. "No, sir." "On whose authority?" "On the authority of the man who set this post," Vane said, "and he hasn't stood it down." I want to be exact about what I felt then because it would be easy to dress it up now as courage. It was not courage, not yet. It was the cold animal pull of the dark and the running and the shaking torch, all of it telling me that Pell was right, that standing still at a blind door in a dead building was the foolish thing, that safety was somewhere else, somewhere with lights and other people. Every instinct I had wanted to follow the deputy warden to the muster point. The only thing that held me was the man beside me, who wanted nothing, who simply continued. "Riani," Pell said, turning the torch on me. "You're younger, you've got sense. Come on. I'm not going to stand here and watch 2 men get hurt over a doorway." And here is the thing I am least proud of and most grateful for. I almost went. I shifted my weight toward him. My boot scraped the stone, and in the dark beside me Vane said, not to Pell but to me, in the flat, low voice he used on the parade square when a recruit's line was drifting, "Hold the door, Riani." 3 words. I stopped. I squared back to the front. I have heard louder orders carry less. Pell made a sound that was half a curse and half a sob, and he was gone, the torchlight bouncing away down the south corridor, and then we were alone in the black with the dead building breathing around us. I could hear Vane's slow, even breath to my left, and the tiny chime of the river wind finding the grate, and far off the city without its lights, which makes a sound you would not expect. A low, confused murmur, 10,000 people all asking the same question into the dark at once. "He's not wrong about the danger," Vane said after a while. "He's wrong about the cure." "Then why are we still here?" I asked. "I am not ashamed of the question. A man should ask it." "Because the post isn't the safe place," Vane said. "It's the necessary place. Those are different things. Pell's job is to make people safe. Ours is to make sure there's still something worth being safe for in the morning." He let that sit. Then, power dies, doors unlock, eyes go blind. "Tell me, Riani, if you were a man who wanted into those vaults, when would you come?" The dark answered for me. The hair rose on the back of my neck. I understood all at once why the east door was the artery, and why a panicking man's good intentions could open it wider than any thief could. The blackout had not made the post dangerous. It had made the post the only thing standing between an open kingdom and whoever was already, perhaps, counting on the lights to fail. I stood with that for a moment, and the dark seemed to press closer, the way it does when you have just been told a thing you cannot unhear. All my life I had thought of a post as a place you were sent to. Vane had just turned it inside out. A post was not a place you were sent. It was a thing you were trusted with, and the trust did not lapse because the lights did. If anything, the trust mattered more in the dark, precisely because no one was watching to see whether you kept it. That is the part that has stayed with me. Discipline that needs an audience is not discipline. It is performance. The true thing is what a man does at a blind door at 3 in the morning with no camera, no officer, and every reasonable voice in the building telling him to leave. Vane had decided that question years before in the light when it cost him nothing, and so in the dark, when it might have cost him everything. There was nothing left to decide. "You think someone made this happen?" I said. "I think I don't know," Vane said. "And not knowing is exactly the reason you don't walk away from the one door that matters. You assume the dark is just dark, and you find out in the morning that it wasn't." He shifted his grip on the rifle, the smallest sound. "We hold until the man who set us here stands us down, or until daylight, whichever comes first. That's all. That's the whole of it. I will tell you now that we did not hold until daylight, and that the man who set us there did stand us down, but not before the dark proved Vane right in a way I have never been able to forget, and not before a deputy warden's panic became the smallest part of what came up that black corridor toward our door. Because Pell, for all his shaking, had been the harmless one. The dark had let something else loose in the Arden Hall that night, and it was moving toward the artery, and there were only the two of us, and one open question standing in its way. The first sign was a smell. You learn on the night watch that the dark has a texture and a temperature and a smell, and that any change in it is information. The Arden Hall at night smells of old wood and floor wax and the cold breath of stone. What I caught now, under all that, was the sharp chemical sweetness of cut wire and the faint ozone tang of something electrical that had been forced. It was coming from below us, from the direction of the muniment stair, where no one should have been. "Vane," I said. "I have it," he said. He had not moved, but everything about him had changed, the way a still pond changes when something passes under the surface. Below and to the right, too, I think. They're trying to be quiet. They're not local men know the floor that creaks. Pell said the cameras are blind. Then were the cameras, Vane said, eyes forward. Don't look at a torch if one shows. It'll blind you for a minute, and a minute is the whole game. Listen. Tell me what you hear and where." I want to be honest about how frightened I was. My mouth was dry as paper, but there is a strange grace in being given a task in a moment like that. Vane gave me listening, and listening gave my fear somewhere to go. I heard the soft scuff of careful boots on the muniment stair. I heard a whispered word, clipped, a language I half knew. I heard the small, precise clicks of a man working a lock with tools that were made for it, and I understood that the deputy warden's panic about fire doors had been the truth wearing the wrong face. The doors had unlocked when the power died, yes, but the men in the dark had not needed that. They had brought their own way in. The blackout was not their accident, it was their appointment. They cut the grid, I breathed. Or paid someone who could, Vane said. It doesn't matter which tonight. Tonight the only thing that matters is this door stays shut to them and the wall hears us, and no one walks away from a post out of fright and leaves a hole. He paused. You see now why I couldn't follow the deputy warden. If we'd gone to the south muster point, this door would be standing open in the dark, and these men would already be in the vaults. And in the morning the House of Aldermark would have lost something it could never buy back, and 2 guardsmen would have been able to say, truthfully, that they were only following the safest order. I would rather be wrong at my post than right at the muster point. I have turned that sentence over 1,000 times. I would rather be wrong at my post than right at the muster point. It is the whole creed of this regiment in 11 words, and I did not deserve to hear it the first time it ever mattered. Then the dark beneath us spoke. A voice came up the muniment stair, low and amused and entirely unafraid, and it was worse than any shout. There's no one up there, it said in accented, careful court tongue. The administrators ran an hour ago. I watched them go. A pause. Whoever you are, go too. We have until the lights come back. You don't. Vane said nothing. Silence, I was learning, was his loudest answer. The man below could not see us, could not hear us breathe, could not know whether the door he meant to reach was held by 2 men or 20. The dark that he had bought to blind the hall blinded him too. And a disciplined man who can wait is more frightening, in that black, than a man who threatens, because the threatener tells you everything, and the silent man tells you nothing at all. Rieni, Vane breathed, so low it was almost only shaped air. Behind you the wall panel, shoulder height, the old service line. It's a separate circuit, hand cranked. It rings down to the guardroom and the guardroom only. The grid can die and that line still lives. Find it. 3 short rings, then hold. That's the alarm that means a breach at the east door. The whole wall will know what it means. I felt along the cold paneling with shaking fingers and found the small brass plate and the recessed handle behind it, and I turned it. 3 short turns and then a long one, and somewhere far away in the bones of the building, a bell I had never heard rang in a room full of men who had trained their whole lives for the one night it would. I did not know then how fast they would come. I only knew that the dark had stopped being a thing that happened to us, and had become a thing we were doing something about, and that the difference between those 2 states is the difference between a victim and a guardsman. Now we hold, Vane said. They'll rush the door when they understand we rang. Stay low, keep the door between them and the latch. We do not need to win down there. We need to still be standing here when the wall arrives. That's all a post ever has to do, be there when the rest of it comes. Can you do that, Rieni? Yes, I said, and to my own surprise it was true. The rush, when it came, was not the chaos I expected. These were not panicking men. They came up the last of the muniment stair fast and low and well drilled, and the first of them put his shoulder to the oak door with a force that meant business, and the door bucked against my brace, and the cold iron bit my palms. But here is what the man in the dark had not reckoned with. He had bought himself blindness and silence and an open building. He had not bought himself the one thing he most needed, which was a door that no one was holding. He thought the east door was an empty door. He met 2 men who had decided, in the plainest possible terms, that it was not. Vane set the rifle aside. He would not use it in that black where he could not see what was beyond his target, and I have never respected a decision more, and put his whole frame against the door beside me, and we held it. Not with rage, with weight and footing and the refusal to give a single inch, which is its own kind of strength and the only kind that lasts. The door heaved. We held. A tool slid through the gap, questing for the latch, and Vane closed his gloved hand over it and simply did not let go. And on the far side, a man swore in the careful court tongue. And I understood that for the first time that night the men in the dark were the ones learning something they did not want to know, that the necessary place was occupied, that the artery was not open, that somewhere a bell they could not hear had already rung. The dark that had not moved Corwin Vane was, at last, beginning to move against the men who had made it. There is a particular fear in holding something with your body that wants to come through. The mind can be brave at a distance. The muscles have their own opinions, and they tell you, in the burning of the shoulder and the slide of the boot on stone, that this cannot be held much longer, that the next heave will be the one. I learned that night that the muscles lie. They told me I was failing a dozen times, and a dozen times I did not fail, because Vane beside me had set a rhythm to it, a small grunt of effort on each push, a half step of recovered footing in each gap, a steadiness that said this is survivable, this is only work, you have done harder work on the parade square in the rain. I matched him because matching him was easier than thinking. That is what a good postmate gives you in the dark. Not encouragement, which is words, but example, which is a thing you can copy with your body when your mind has gone to water. They tried the door 3 times. Each time the weight of 2 braced men met them, and each time they fell back to confer, and in the gaps I could hear how the amusement was draining out of the voice below. The first rush had been confident. The second was angry. The third was something I had not expected to hear from men so well drilled, it was hurried. They had heard nothing of my bell, but they had begun, I think, to feel the same thing Pell had felt, the dark turning on them, the clock they thought they owned running short. A man who plans on darkness as his ally never quite trusts it, because darkness keeps no loyalties. They're reconsidering, Vane murmured. Good. A man reconsidering a door is a man not through it. He kept his shoulders set, his breathing even, and he spoke to me the way you speak to a horse in a storm, low and continuous, so the fear has a voice to lean on. Listen past them now. Tell me what's behind us. I had been so fixed on the door that I had stopped hearing the building. Now I listened back into the south corridor where Pell had fled, and at first there was only the dead hall. And then, faint and growing, there was something else, a sound I knew in my body before I knew it in my mind, because I had made it 10,000 times on the parade square. Boots. Many boots, moving together, fast and even, the unmistakable cadence of men who march as one because they have been made into one. The wall was coming. My 3 short rings and a long one had reached the guardroom, and the guardroom had reached the muster, and the muster had not gone to the safe south point and waited for the lights. It had armed in the dark and turned toward the bell. You hear it, Vane said. It was not a question. That's the regiment, Riani. That's what a post is for. A post isn't one man being brave alone in the dark. A post is one man holding the line long enough for 10,000 to arrive. We were never the whole wall. We were only the part of it that had to be here first. The men below heard the boots too. There is no mistaking that cadence even through a banded oak door, and the voice in the dark gave one last order in the court tongue, and it was not an order to attack. It was an order to run. I heard them go down the muniment stair faster than they had come up it, abandoning the questing tool still locked in Vane's glove, abandoning the careful silence, all their bought darkness suddenly worth nothing against the simple fact of men arriving in numbers at a door that had refused to open. They fled toward the river vaults and the old water stair, the way men flee who have studied the building's exits as carefully as its entrances. But they fled into a hall that was no longer blind, because the regiment carried its own light, and its own discipline, and its own long memory of every passage that an unhonest man might think was secret. Then the south corridor filled with torchlight, and the cadence broke into the ordered, controlled spread of men taking a building back, and at the head of them, I will never forget it, came not an officer but Deputy Warden Pell, who had run, Pell whose torch had shaken so badly I could not hold his face. He had run, yes, but he had not run to safety. He had run to the guardroom. He had run to find the men who could do what he could not, and he had brought them back at a dead sprint through a black building, and his torch was steady now, because a frightened man who finds the right thing to do stops being frightened in the only way that counts. "East doors held," Pell shouted, and his voice did not crack. "2 of ours on it they held. They're below the water stair, go. The wall went past us like a tide. I felt the wind of them." And in the middle of it Pell stopped, just for a moment, and put the steady torch on the 2 of us still braced against the oak with a thief's tool jammed in a glove. And on his face was a thing I have seen only a few times in my life and never tire of seeing. The look of a man who has just understood, completely and at once, exactly how wrong he was, and exactly why it matters that someone refused to obey him. "I ordered you off this post," Pell said. "You did, sir," Vane said. "And if you'd obeyed me, they'd be in the vaults right now." "Yes, sir." Pell looked at the door, at the dark below, at the boots pouring down toward the water stair. "Then I'm grateful you're a worse subordinate than I am a warden," he said, and there was no bitterness in it, only the clean relief of a man who has been spared the worst day of his life by someone else's spine. He turned and went after his men, the torch steady, the warden remade, and I understood that the institution rallying was not only the regiment in the corridor. It was also this, a frightened official becoming, in one black hour, the man his sash had always asked him to be. The dark had tested more than the guard. It had tested everyone it touched and shown each of them what they were made of. Below us the chase ran its course. I will tell it plainly, because plainness is what it deserves. The men from the dark reached the old water stair and found it was not the forgotten exit they had studied on some stolen plan, because the regiment had men there too, posted in the same stubborn logic Vane had taught me at the east door, that you hold the necessary places, not the comfortable ones. They were taken at the river arch without a shot, because there was no shot to take. There were only men in the dark meeting a wall they could not have imagined, and choosing, sensibly, the cuffs over the cold river. Their bought darkness ended not in fire and ruin, but in the quiet of a man's hands being drawn behind his back by guardsmen who had trained their whole lives for a night they hoped would never come, and met it without raising their voices. And the lights came back near dawn, all at once, the way a held breath ends, and the whole city's necklace of lamps lit again across the river, and the Arden Hall's chandeliers woke one by one down the paneled halls, and the dead building breathed again. I remember the exact moment the bulb above the east door flickered and held, because in its sudden plain yellow light I finally saw Corwin Vane's face, and it was the same face it had been in the dark, level and unhurried, eyes forward, as if nothing had happened at all, as if he had merely stood his watch, which, in the only way he would ever describe it, is precisely what he had done. But it was not over, not quite. Because an order had been refused that night, an order from a man with a sash and the authority to give it, and in the daylight that follows a black hour, refusing an order has a way of becoming its own kind of trouble. And I learned, in the days after, exactly how the system answers a guardsman who would rather be wrong at his post than right at the muster point. The first answer was a summons. 2 days after the blackout, with the grid restored and the hall scrubbed of any sign that men had ever crept up the muniment stair, Corwin Vane was called before a board of inquiry. I went too, because I had been the second man, and because I would not have let him go in alone if they had tried to stop me. The board sat in the long council room of the Arden Hall, under a ceiling painted with the old emblems of the House of Aldermark, and at its head sat the marshal of the watch, a gray, spare man named Aldwyn Crane, who had set more posts in his life than any officer alive, and who, I would soon learn, was the very man Vane had meant when he said the post had not been stood down. There were others on the board who did not love what Vane had done. That is the truth of any institution, and I will not pretend otherwise. A senior administrator, a colleague of Pell's, laid it out cleanly enough. A deputy warden, vested with authority over the building, gave a direct order during a declared emergency, he said. He judged the post unsafe. He ordered the guardsmen to withdraw to the muster point. Guardsman Vane refused twice, and instructed the junior guardsman to refuse with him. Whatever the outcome, we cannot have a watch in which men decide for themselves which orders to keep. Discipline is obedience. That is the whole of it. I want to be fair to the man who said it, because the niche of these stories is honor, and I would dishonor it by making him a villain. He was not wrong about the danger of men deciding for themselves which orders to keep. A watch in which every sentry weighs each command against his own judgment is no watch at all. It is a mob in fine tunics. He had seen in his career the slow rot that begins when good men start trusting their own convenience over the chain that holds them, and he had built his whole creed against it. And his creed was a good creed for 999 nights out of 1,000. The trouble was the 1,000th night, which had just happened, and which his creed had no room for. He spoke from a true principle that had met its single true exception, and he could not yet see the seam between them. I felt the cold of the room then, worse than the cold of the dark had been, because in the dark the enemy had been outside us, and here it wore a sash and spoke reasonably, and believed itself the keeper of the very discipline it was about to punish. I looked at Vane. He stood at attention, eyes forward, and said nothing, because they had not yet asked him to speak, and he would not speak until they did. I had thought I understood his discipline at the door. I understood it better in that room, where the easy thing would have been to defend himself, and the disciplined thing was to wait. It was the marshal who finally spoke, and he did not raise his voice. Aldwin Crane never raised his voice. He had learned somewhere in 50 years of posts that the men who matter lean in to hear the quiet ones. "You say discipline is obedience," he said to the administrator. "Tell me then, obedience to whom?" He let the question hang. "The deputy warden has authority over the building. He does not have authority over the post. The post is set by the watch and stood down by the watch, and by no one else, in light or in dark, in peace or in fire. That is not a loophole. That is the oldest rule we have, and we have it for exactly the night we just had, so that no frightened man, however well-meaning, however senior, can talk a sentry off the one door that must not open. Guardsman Vane did not disobey discipline. He was the last man in this building still keeping it." He turned to Vane then. "You refused a lawful-seeming order from a man of rank in the dark, with no way to know if you were right. Tell the board why." And Vane spoke. Not long. Vane was never long. "Because the order was given to the wrong post by the wrong authority, sir," he said. "The deputy warden's duty was to clear the people who could be cleared. Mine was to hold the one place that could not be left. If I had been wrong, the worst I would have done was stand a needless watch in an empty hall, and I would have answered for the discomfort of it. If I had obeyed and been wrong, the house would have lost what it cannot replace, and no answer afterward would have mattered. Between those two, sir, there is no choice. There is only the post." The room was quiet. The painted emblems looked down, and the marshal of the watch did a thing I had never seen a man of his rank do in an inquiry. He stood. The whole board scraped to its feet after him, because you stand when the marshal stands. And so the men who had come to judge Corwin Vane found themselves on their feet in his presence, which is its own verdict before a word of it is spoken. "The board finds no fault," Crane said. "It finds the opposite. Let the record show that on the night of the failure of the city grid, with the Arden Hall blind and a deputy warden ordering withdrawal in good faith and great error, Guardsman Corwin Vane held the east door against an organized intrusion, raised the alarm by the old service line, and did not yield the post until the watch arrived in force, and the men of the dark were taken at the water stair. Let the record show that he refused an order he was right to refuse, and that the refusal of it is the reason the vaults of this house are whole this morning. And let it be known to every man on every post in this service." And here the quiet voice did at last gather an edge, that the post is stood down by the watch and by no one else. Not by fear, not by rank that does not own it, not by the dark, By the watch, as it has always been. He looked at the administrator who had spoken of obedience. You are not wrong that discipline is obedience, he said, more gently. You are wrong about who the sentry obeys. He obeys the post. We built it that way before either of us was born because men like us in rooms like this cannot be trusted to be brave at 3 in the morning. So we made a rule that does the bravery for us, and we ask a few good men to keep it when we cannot. Guardsman Vane kept it. The rest of us only argued about it afterward in the light where it is easy. That was the system rallying. Not the boots in the corridor, that was the regiment. This was the system, a rule older than any of us, voiced by the one man with the standing to voice it, closing ranks not around a person but around a principle, and in doing so backing the correct call so completely that no administrator in that hall would ever again mistake his sash for command of a sentry. I have served under the protection of that ruling every night since. Every man on the east door has. When the next official in the next crisis opens his mouth to order a withdrawal, he will find that Corwin Vane's quiet refusal got there first and built a wall around the post that no good intention can talk its way through. And Pell, I have not forgotten Pell, and the system did not either. He could have been broken for the order he gave. Instead, the marshal called him in, alone, and I do not know all of what was said, but I know what came out of it. Pell was not broken. He was reassigned, in a manner of speaking, given the task of writing the new Blackout protocol for the whole of the Ardenhall, the document that would govern what every administrator and every guardsman did the next time the lights died. The marshal's logic was the kind that takes you a moment to feel the weight of. The man best fitted to write the rule against a future panic was the man who had panicked, learned, and run for the right help. Pell took it as the second chance it was. The protocol he wrote runs to 9 pages, and the first line of it I can recite from memory, because Vane keeps a copy folded in his tunic to this day. It reads, "In the failure of power, administrators clear the people. The watch holds the posts. No civil officer may order a sentry from a set post, and any sentry so ordered shall hold." Pell wrote the rule that would have stopped his own order. There is no finer apology a man can make than to build the wall that protects others from his worst hour. He came to find Vane himself before the ink was dry. I was there for that too. He did not bring his sash or his authority. He brought a plain question, the kind a man brings when he has finally stopped performing his rank. "How did you know?" he asked. "In the dark with nothing, how did you know not to go?" Vane considered it the way he considered everything, without hurry. "I didn't know they were down there, sir," he said. "I'll tell you the truth, for the first hour I knew nothing at all. I only knew the door. A man can't always see the danger, but he can always see his post. So you hold the thing you can see and you let it carry you through the things you can't. That's not knowing, sir. That's just standing where you're meant to stand until the knowing arrives." He paused. "It usually does." Pell nodded slowly and put out his hand, and Vane took it, and that was the whole of their reconciliation. 2 men who had been on opposite sides of an order in the dark, agreeing in the light on which of them had been right, with no grudge between them and no need for one. I have come to think that is what honor looks like when you strip the medals off it. Not the grand refusal, but the plain handshake afterward, the willingness on one side to be corrected and on the other to correct without cruelty. The men from the dark were the kingdom's business after that, and not mine to tell, except for one thing the inquiry established that I think matters. They had not been common thieves. They had studied the hall for months, the plans, the circuits, the forgotten water stair, the daytime rhythms of the administrators, even the exact hour the night relief changed. They had engineered the blackout, or paid for it, to strip the Ardenhall of every defense it had, its lights, its cameras, its locks, its alarms, every defense but one. They had accounted for the machinery and forgotten the man. They had assumed, as clever men so often do, that a defense made of a single guardsman and a junior beside him was the weakest part of the wall and the first to fail. It was, in the end, the only part that did not. You can cut a city's power. You cannot cut a man's discipline. There is no wire that runs to it. I think about that more than I expected to. We live in an age that trusts the machinery, the cameras that see in the dark, the locks that need no man, the alarms that ring themselves. And the machinery is good, and I am glad of it. But the machinery all runs on the same grid, and the grid can die in a single held breath. And on the night it does, everything we have outsourced to the wire goes dark with it. What remains is what was never on the wire to begin with. A man at a door who decided beforehand what he would do and does it. The Arden Hall keeps its treasures behind steel and current and code, and all of it failed in an hour, and the treasures are whole this morning because of the one defense that cannot be switched off. I do not say this to scorn the machinery. I say it because we had forgotten it, and a black hour reminded us, and I do not want to forget it again. As for the two of us, there was a small ceremony, the kind the regiment does quietly, with no cameras and no crowd, in the same council room. The marshal gave Vane no medal that day, because Vane had asked him not to, and Crane was the sort of man who honors a quiet request as readily as a loud deed. Instead, he did something Vane could not refuse. He read out before the assembled watch the log of the post for the night of the blackout in full in its plain official language, the time the power failed, the time the deputy warden ordered withdrawal, the words of the refusal, the ringing of the old service line, the arrival of the wall, the taking of the men at the water stair, the restoration of power at dawn, and the single closing line that the marshal himself had added in his own hand, post held. That was all. Post held. 2 words in a ledger, among 10,000 other knights. But every man in that room understood that those 2 words were the highest thing this service can write about a man, because they mean he was there when it mattered, and he did not move, and because he did not move, the rest of us still have something to guard. I am older now, and I have stood the east door through many quiet nights and a few loud ones, and I have trained second men of my own the way Vane trained me, mostly by standing where I stand and letting them work out why. When the lights are steady and the city's necklace burns bright across the river, the post can feel like a formality, a man in a fine tunic at a plain oak door, and I have watched the young ones grow restless in the ease of it, the way I once almost grew restless toward a shaking torch. So I tell them about the blackout, not as a war story. Vane would never forgive me a war story. I tell it the way he would. I tell them that the post is not the safe place. It is the necessary place, and the two are different things. I tell them that an order can wear a sash and a cracking voice and still be the wrong order, and that the courage is not in the refusing but in the knowing beforehand in the light exactly what your post requires, so that when the dark comes you do not have to decide, you only have to stand. And I tell them the last thing, the thing that has stayed with me longest. On the morning the lights came back, when the bulb above the east door flickered and held and I saw Corwin Vane's face for the first time in hours, I asked him foolishly whether he had been afraid in the dark. He looked at me with that level, unhurried look, and he said, "Of course I was afraid, Riani. Fear isn't the question. Fear came and stood at the door with us all night. I just didn't let it relieve me." Then the day shift came up the corridor in the clean yellow light, boots even on the stone, and we stood our last few minutes of the watch in silence, 2 men at a plain oak door that had held when the whole world went dark. And when our relief arrived and the post was properly, lawfully stood down, by the watch and by no one else, we marched off it the way we had stood it. Unhurried, eyes forward, unbroken, the way the post is meant to be kept and the way, please God, it always will be.